I'm going to spend quite a few minutes talking about the subject of enterprise architecture and what it means. You will find it useful if you are a technologist who is exploring going into that area, or if you are a young person just out of school, you're exploring professions and career paths, and you want to know what to do. One of the things I like to start with is analogies. The reason I'll start with analogies is that I always believe that the information technology profession is a very young profession compared to the likes of medicine, the likes of architecture, building architecture, engineering, and so forth. Some of these professions have become very explicit in how they have articulated what the profession means, how it runs. A colleague of mine once made a joke that if you wanted to get married and you go to tell your in-laws that I am a doctor, they know exactly what you mean, but if you tell them I am an enterprise architect, you probably have to explain yourself quite well. So our profession still needs a lot of explanation, and I mentioned information technology because enterprise architecture as a profession somehow emerged within the context of the information technology profession. And the reason is that one of the primary things we talk about in the world of enterprise architecture is business IT alignment. Business IT alignment, which means making sure that from a strategic perspective, the initiatives that an IT organization is embarking on, they are expected to basically drive business value. They are expected to basically align with the business strategy. Now, this might sound very abstract to you. It might sound quite abstract if you're like, every role in the organization is supposed to align with business, project managers, IT developers, and so forth. But there is a very important distinction here in the world of enterprise architecture because there's a system, a method to the madness, a method of linking strategy with business, linking business strategy with technology initiatives. Many people come into technology spaces with bright ideas that they got from their previous places of work, bright ideas that they got off the internet. That has to be contextualized. So enterprise architecture is about context. And what we mean by context is the environment in which the attempt to do a digital transformation is happening. So you probably have heard of terms like digital transformation, like technology roadmaps, projects and programs, what you do to change the state of affairs. One of the things enterprise architects do is try to understand the state of affairs in the first place, and we call that the current state architecture. What do things look like today? And we use the word architecture in very specific terms. I would like to simplify by saying it is all about components and interactions. What components or what systems or what people, what elements are involved in this organization, in this system, in this department, in this business, and how do they talk to each other? How do they interact? How do they flow with each other? A deep, well-versed understanding of that is required before you say the state of affairs today is not good enough. We have found a number of gaps. We call them gaps, things that need to change. Therefore, we are launching transformation initiatives to move the organization from this current state to another state, which we typically call the future state, previously called the end state. But of course, there's no end state per se. So part of the goal of an enterprise architecture practice is to say, This is what things look like today. This is what they should look like, and this is the difference between the current state and the future state. That difference, or those gaps, are expected to trigger transformation initiatives. Now, in describing the current state and the future state, we use artifacts, we use models, and artifacts are described as being composed of catalogs, matrices, and diagrams. So a catalog is basically a list of things. For example, you may want to know the list of all the applications in your shop, in your IT environment. You may want to know the list of all the actors, the list of all the apps of the staff. You want to know the list of all the integrations you have. You want the list of all the APIs. You want a list of all the products, all sorts of lists, all sorts of inventories, all sorts of catalogs. They matter to the enterprise architect and in the world of enterprise architecture. So there's that kind of model. A model is a representation of something. So there's the model called the catalog, or the catalog of things, the list of things. There's another kind of catalog called the matrix. A matrix is mostly a two-dimensional representation that shows the relationship between two things. It could be an application capability matrix, which means which applications do you have and what are they doing. So you have the applications on one side of your matrix, and you have the their capabilities, application capabilities, on the other side, on the x-axis, and the other one on the y-axis, which means you are trying to kind of like show a visual that shows the relationship between your applications and your capabilities, or the relation between your applications and your processes, for example, or between applications and roles. So you have those kinds of matrices. The most popular kind of models or artifacts that we are probably most popular and most known for are diagrams, right? Models that represent things at various levels. And in quite a few architecture frameworks, we try to model based on the audience. We call them views and viewpoints, right? Views and viewpoints, which means if I do a model, it is for someone, it is for a particular audience. And the way I do my model is indicative of who is going to consume it. So we are basically cognizant of the concerns, what matters to the different audiences that we want to talk to, because artifacts are generally communication tools. Artifacts are communication tools. They are expected to say something. They tell the audience something. And what we're telling the audience is dependent on what we want to get out of them. What decision do we want to get out of the conversation? You must get a conversation out of the decision, out of the modeling. Well, I mean, if you're doing diagrams, it's not for the sake of it. It's not artwork. We don't just do artwork that people appreciate and say, this is a nice diagram. What we're doing is trying to spark a conversation that leads to a decision. The conversation around your model must lead to a decision. So that is why the process of modeling, whether you are modeling catalogs or matrices or diagrams, the process of developing those artifacts is far more important than the output, which is the artifacts themselves. It is important that that process is a collaborative process, as a process that involves a lot of engagement, because the model represents something real. If the representation is not correct, then obviously the conversation you like to have might lead to the wrong decision. So you must make sure that we are having the right conversation with the right people and we are getting our facts right. The reason for a picture is also because when you model something, when you draw a diagram, you're basically extracting information from the heads of people most of the time, from different diverse sources, and you are capturing it as a model within a certain framework for a certain set of people on with a certain set of what do you call them, standards or conventions, so that your models is saying something that we all understand. And when we all look at it, we'll be able to identify our own aspect of the component and interactions, our own aspect of the architecture that you have shared. So they are expected to drive decisions. Architects do they want to capture the current state, the future state, and they want to identify gaps. In order to capture the current state, the future state, and identify gaps, we have to use some kind of modeling. And there are three types of modelings, three types of artifacts at least: catalogs, matrices, diagrams. There could be others. And the purpose of modeling, of putting together artifacts, is to make sure that we have shared understanding, that we can drive conversations that lead to decisions. So we can drive conversations that lead to correct decisions. Now, in essence, aside from doing this modeling, the whole end state, the whole end game of an enterprise architect's effort is to influence transformation in the correct direction. In influencing transformation, one of the things we are doing is trying to see the big picture, or take account of the big picture for the long term. The big picture for the long term. So you probably hear terms or expressions like impact analysis. When we have the big picture in view, we'll be able to evaluate and check whether the initiative we're currently embarking on, what is the impact of it, what components across the enterprise are they touching, and how can we make sure that we have the right response to the potential impact of the transformation. For example, you could say, I want to bring in an AI agent capability. I want to be able to deploy AI agents in my organization. What is the impact of that initiative? Are people going to lose jobs? Are people going to need training? We need to address our data. What kind of leadership do we need? And so on and so forth. When we want to look at this big picture and articulate the impact analysis, we try to do it in a structured fashion. We try to look at the different domains of such impact. What we mean by domains are the business domain, the data domain, the application domain, and the technology domain. Some people call it, this is called BDAT. Some people call it BATE. So the business, data, application, and technology domains can also be called the business, application, information, and technology domains, right? Now, that articulation across these domains implies that when examining an architecture, you want to take into account the business area of concern, right? The business domain might include business capabilities. It might include business processes. It might include roles and actors. It might include organizational charts. You want to ask yourself, for this gap that I have identified between the current state and the future state that is triggering a digital transformation, what is the impact on the business domain, on capabilities I need to mature, on capabilities that I currently have, on processes that are existing, documented or undocumented? What is the impact on the data elements? Who owns the data that is moving? How do I secure that data? What technology platforms do I need to make a decision about that I'm layering all this on? So in essence, a lot of effective impact analysis must have you thinking across domains: business, data, application, and technology. You also may want to think about dimensions, which is the people, process, technology dimensions, but I'll save that and talk about it when I talk about business capabilities in depth. So you are trying to understand the organization from a big picture in order to paint the current state, the future state, then to analyze the gaps and trigger transformation initiatives that will bridge the gaps in your organization as a whole. And you are doing this using certain modeling techniques. It could be catalogs, it could be matrices, it could be diagrams, and you're doing this collaboratively with others who are subject matter experts, because as an enterprise architect, you are not a specialist, you are a generalist. You are not a specialist in any particular technology area or any particular subject area per se. You are a generalist. You are not an expert in identity and access management. You're not an expert in customer relationship management. You're not an expert in enterprise resource planning. You're not an expert in any of these verticals, but you're a generalist. You're not a specialist in them, but you're a generalist. You speak across board and you try to connect the dots across these different areas of business, areas of technology, because these areas of technology are components of your enterprise for which you need to understand how they interact. To drive such a transformation, you need to break your thinking into 4 domains at the minimum: the business domain, the data domain, the application domain, the technology domain, or otherwise called the BATE, the business, application, information, and technology domains. And you want to, because you are trying to paint the big picture and show people the impact of what they are doing, and also drive coherence. You want to drive coherence, you want to drive continuity, because as much as you're thinking about the big picture, you also want to think about the long term. That's where topics like technical debt come in, or enterprise debt. That means you are doing something today which you have to do again, or which will create a new problem. You want to try to avoid that in your impact analysis, to say, how can we make sure that we do this so well today that it yields value, business value for us over a long period of time, rather than just the immediate need. So you think about things in terms of big picture and long term. All right, so you are driving transformation, you are trying to understand the current state, you're trying to understand or articulate the future state, and you're trying to bridge the gaps. The way you bridge gaps is to trigger initiatives that are meaningful based on the current understanding of the understanding of the current state, based on business strategy. Let me give you a little bit of an analogy, or a set of analogies that are typically used to describe enterprise architecture. One of them is that of town planning. It's an old analogy, but it sometimes sends the message home depending on the audience that you have. So the analogy simply says, I am trying to design a city. I'm trying to plan a city. I look at the whole landscape, bare landscape, and I determine that in a certain part of the city we need to have a train station. In another part, we need to have the airport. In another part, we need to have the rail line. We need to have a water body. We need to isolate a certain area for as a reservoir for maybe animals or plants. We also need to have waterways planned out. We need to have the piping, etc. So there are several components of this city that we need to understand how they interact, lay them out carefully, model them, and get an agreement that this is what our city should look like. Once you determine that this is what our city should look like in the next X number of years, you ask yourself, what do I need to bridge the gap between what my city is now and what it must be in the next X years? You begin to launch initiatives or projects that build out the residential area, that build out the waterways, the major waterways where people's buildings can now plug into, that build out the airport and designate an area and so forth. You can trigger those initiatives, but you are not always the one responsible for delivering them. Those are for the engineers, the project managers, and so forth. But the idea is that you're always keeping an eye on these initiatives to make sure that we are following the blueprint, that we are following what we said, agreed, and collaboratively designed, that this is what we want our city to look like in the next 5 years. Now, you are trying to make sure of this. At the same time, have sufficient capacity judgment to make changes as your city evolves, because as your city evolves, things will change. There'll be new ways of doing things you need to account for. There'll be new requirements you need to factor in. There'll be new realities you need to capture. It's a part of your design to be cognizant of those emerging realities that change the shape of your landscape slightly. But again, you still have that general big picture of where you are going as a city. So if you think of your city as an organization, there should be that general picture. Some people call it a roadmap. The roadmap is the set of things you must enable over time and in a certain sequence to bridge the gaps between your current state and your future state. The picture is not always clear to everybody, but you make your effort as the enterprise architect to try to make sure it is as clear as possible to you. You may use diagrams to do this, you may use models, you may use presentations, you may have conversations where these things are being articulated and documented. So in essence, you are driving transformation from the back, if you may say so. There are those who are digital transformation experts, those who are project managers, those who are senior leaders who call the shots. But you are always in the back room, in the back end, in most cases, articulating the rationale across the decisions that you're making to ensure that they are coherent, they are consistent, and they have a certain level of continuity, right, across your transformation journey as an organization. So you want to be very much involved in that. Now, let me talk about a few things you might be doing as an enterprise architect joining an organization that is already in flux, because that organization, you are not responsible for designing it from scratch. You may want to be involved by triggering initiatives that shape the future from where that organization is to the next where it ought to be. That may include things like rationalizing applications, which means you do a catalog of your application portfolio and you determine through a set of systematic evaluations what applications still need to remain in the environment and which applications don't need to remain in the environment. You need to think about which applications are adding value and which applications are not adding value anymore. You need to think about which applications have a reasonable level of adoption versus those that do not, and so forth. So there are quite a few techniques to adopt in order to determine what applications are still valuable and should remain in your portfolio versus those that should not. As an enterprise architect, you may be deeply involved in such rationalization because you see the big picture. You know how to model catalogs of applications, how to model application to process, application to capability, application to role matrices. You also know how to develop diagrams that show how these things exactly work and so forth. Now, you may find yourself doing that rationalization. You may also find yourself doing business capability mapping, which means articulating what the business does. This is a very deep area as well. and it's a bridge between strategy and execution in many cases, or one of the key components of such a bridge. That business capabilities simply ask you, what do I do? And let me give a quick example of this. Let's assume you walk into a restaurant. They tell you, you ask them, what happens here? What do you do here? Assuming you're from outer space or something. They may tell you a very simple statement like, we cook food and we serve food. Cooking food and serving food are capabilities. Cooking food, verb, noun, nomenclature. Food cooking, noun, verb, nomenclature. Whatever nomenclature you need to you articulate, you probably want to stick with it and say the definition of cooking food is this. This is a capability. The definition of serving food is this. And you could have sub capabilities that are derived from that major thing the restaurant does. It could be such as purchasing condiments, for example. It could be such things as setting tables. It could be such things as calling customers or delivering food, etc., etc. Now, capability mapping is putting together a visual that illustrates your set of the most critical capabilities for that restaurant, and you begin to do stuff with that picture. What do you do with that picture? You make decisions with the picture. You make decisions like, which capabilities are my primary? Where do I excel most? Which capabilities are my most dominant capabilities? Which capabilities are my core competencies? Which capabilities do I need to outsource versus those I need to insource? Which capabilities will give me a competitive advantage? Which capabilities are lagging when juxtaposed with my overall strategy? Which capabilities do I need to mature? Which capabilities are a maturity level 1 that I need to move to a more significant maturity level, etc., etc. Which capabilities require attention? Once you identify those capabilities that require attention, you may want to say, how do I mature them? In maturing capabilities or moving capabilities from one level of sophistication to another, you want to ask yourself, what is the gap here? Is the gap in the people dimension, in the process dimension, or in the technology dimension? Your capability is a composite of those 3 dimensions at the minimum: people, process, technology. And you want to ask yourself, do I have enough people for this to deliver cooking food or serving tables as a capability? Do I have the right kind of skills to deliver serving tables as an enterprise or organizational capability? And you want to ask, do I have the right organizational chart? Are my reporting lines fine-tuned to deliver this organizational capability? Then you go to the next phase and ask, do I have the right processes? Are my processes documented, clear, explicit, known by all? Are they efficient enough to help deliver this capability? The processes side could stretch into other forms of governance around the capability, whether it is your policy, your charters, your procedures, SOPs, and so forth. Anything that has to do with shaping the system around that capability. Then finally, the technology, the tools that you use to deliver the capability. When it comes to serving tables, do I need a robot or do I just need trays, for example? When it comes to serving tables, do I need a beeping instrument on the top of the table that tells the customer that their food is ready and so forth? So you articulate, what do I need to make sure this capability has moved, this capability of, for example, serving tables have moved from level A to level B over a certain period of time. Your articulation of what you need across those 3 dimensions is also a form of gap analysis that helps you determine what initiatives do I need to launch in order to bridge the gaps for that specific capability and mature it. And bridging the gap for that specific capability might just be as simple as developing the process for serving tables to make your people more efficient. It could be a training need. It could also be building or buying a robot that gets the food to the clients or the customers, the diners, without complaining all the time. So there are many ways to look at it. All right, so in essence, this is a little bit about capabilities and can be used to do a lot more than that. But the important thing you need to ask yourself is, whenever I have a new initiative within my organization, what capability does it seek to mature? What exact capability does it seek to mature? It must not be just to make someone more popular or just to make sure that we are doing something. What we are doing must map back to what is important to the business. So you start the conversation from what capabilities are important to the business and how do we make sure we are getting better at delivering those capabilities. Remember, capabilities are about what you do as an organization, not who does them or how you do them at this point. It is when you get to the point of maturing capabilities that you begin to ask questions around who does them. When you're mapping capabilities to start with, you just want to know, what do we do as an organization? Do we cook food? Do we serve food? etc. Then you determine, what do we need to do well by ourselves? What do we need to do well by onboarding vendors? What do we need to do well by training people? What do we need to do well by hiring people, and so forth? All right, that's a little bit about capability mapping. You might find yourself doing that as an enterprise architect. You might also find yourself running and maintaining an architecture repository. Maintaining an architecture repository, which basically is that store of your patterns, of your architecture patterns, that store of your recorded documented architecture artifacts, that store of everything that has to do with what we call the enterprise continuum. That is the picture of what the landscape looks like for you as an organization. This could be explained in more detail, but I'll just say, think of it as your reference repo for architecture practice. Now, you could also find yourself running an architecture review board. That's a popular name. It could be called something else in your organization. In one of my organizations I worked for, they called it a central design authority. All right. So in essence, what are you doing there? You're basically ensuring that each initiative that requires architectural decisions in your organization passes through a form of scrutiny to ensure that there is alignment between that initiative, that solution, that deployment, and the big picture you have painted in your enterprise architecture blueprint. In essence, you want to ask yourself, do I need an ARB, and do I still need an ARB? There are arguments for and against the need for ARBs in this day and age, where there's a lot of agile conversations, etc. But whether you use an ARB or not, you must have a mechanism for ensuring that each new solution that is pipelined or pushed into your IT landscape is actually adding to the overall big picture of your organization in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is satisfactory, in a way that makes sense for you. So you need to work through that it is one effective way, or one known way, maybe not, effective is arguable, one clear way to basically keep an eye on what is emerging. One of the ways in practice you may want to look at making it practical or practicable or meaningful is not to try to run every single idea through an ARB. Think of what really matters. Think of what shifts the needle in your organization. Think of what creates the opportunity for further innovation, and ensure that those are designed properly, right? before you move, before people start using them based on their own judgment, so to speak. So an ARB is basically a collection of people who help you take architectural decisions in a rational fashion, referencing standards, referencing principles, referencing antecedents, referencing information, and getting guidance from leadership to make sure that those decisions are taken in a coherent, consistent fashion that ensures continuity as you evolve your organization from one level to another. And you want to set up the mechanisms for that based on rational decisions. People cannot just have bright ideas and keep revolving around nuances of this is my opinion. You should ask yourself, does this opinion align with our standards, our principles? So this implies you must have established some kind of a governance framework based upon which the architecture review board is built, and we can talk about that on and on and on. Now, out of architecture review boards, decisions will come, so you must probably capture and document those decisions. You must have them in your repository. They must be referenceable. You must be able to defend them and use it also to challenge future decisions. You may also find yourself involved in putting together roadmaps and architecture blueprints, basically, as we said in the beginning, how we want to look in the future. Now, obviously, you find yourself modeling, you find yourself doing research to find out what is new in the industry and let it help shape the evolution of your own enterprise. You may also find yourself implementing or using an enterprise architecture tool. There are quite a few of them out there which are popular: Evolution, Orbus Wireless, Orbus iServer rather, Essential Cloud, Hopex. These days, even ServiceNow is coming up with EA tools and so forth. So there are quite a few of them out there, and the idea of an EA tool is to help you model the enterprise in an efficient way, to help you take decisions about the impact of solutions in an efficient way, to help you plan the future. So those are some things you may want to explore. Using an EA tool and using, of course, AI in our day accelerates your impact, amplifies your impact as an enterprise architect. But the fundamental basis, the fundamental nuances of being an enterprise architect are that you must collaborate with people, understand you're not a specialist, you're a generalist. You must bring people into the room, ask the right questions, paint a picture that is relevant to your audience, or paint pictures that are relevant to audience. Use pictures for collaborative decision making. Let the process be more important than the output of a modeling exercise. And ensure you are capturing decisions, driving transformation forward in a coherent, continuous, in a coherent, consistent, and a manner that drives continuity within your enterprise. So you find yourself that you are everywhere, because you must cut across people, process, technology. You must cut dimensions. You must cut across business, data, application, and technology domains, and so forth. And you just must make sure, that you're bridging the gaps across board, not just on a siloed system by system basis. So I'm going to pause here. I've been talking for about 40 minutes, almost 40 minutes. If you do have questions, you want to type the question in the chat, and you want to share your own experience as an enterprise architect or as someone who is working in cross-functional roles that help shape the future of the enterprise. Share your experience, ask questions. I can also share more about my experience, how this happens in practice. And if you want to follow this career path, happy to help you as well. Do so if you have gotten to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and do have a wonderful day ahead. Bye.